All right, let's dive right into this explainer and look at the absolute miracle that is human movement. We seriously take for granted how effortlessly we interact with the world around us. But if you zoom in on the biology, the human body is this spectacularly complex machine. I mean, every single step you take, every breath you draw, every time you reach for your phone, it requires a cosmic-scale symphony of nerves, muscles, and brain signals, all firing in perfect harmony. So today, we're going to explore what happens when that biological symphony plays a slightly different tune, and we'll be focusing on two completely fascinating neurological conditions, hypotonia and dyspraxia. Seriously, have you ever thought about how incredibly hard it is just to tie a shoe? It seems so ridiculously simple to most of us, right? But this mundane, everyday task is actually a staggering biological operation. To just tie a knot, your brain has to calculate distance, balance your entire torso, shoot precise electrical signals down your spinal cord, and command literally millions of neurons and muscle fibers to fire at the exact same time. When you start to grasp the sheer scale of this engineering marvel, it makes total sense why, sometimes, those connections don't happen exactly as expected.
Now, we really need to clear up a massive misconception right off the bat. When most of us hear the word tone, we instantly think of hitting the gym to get ripped. But in neurology, muscle tone is actually the baseline tension in your body when it's completely at rest. Think of it exactly like a guitar string. Even when you're not actively playing the guitar, that string needs a certain amount of tightness just to hold its shape and be ready to vibrate. That underlying automatic tension is what keeps our posture upright without us having to consciously think about it for even a second.
So, a great way to wrap our heads around this is to think of it like a computer issue, hardware versus software. Hypotonia is essentially a hardware issue. The muscles physically lack that baseline tension, so they act like loose guitar strings that are incredibly difficult to play. Dyspraxia, on the other hand, is a software issue. The muscles have the right tension, the strings are perfectly tuned, but the brain's motor planning signals get completely scrambled on their way to the muscles. It's exactly like a bad Wi-Fi connection trying to stream a 4K video. The data's there, it's just buffering and glitching. So, let's start by zooming in on that hardware issue, hypotonia, or the missing tension. Since this condition is present right from birth, medical folks sometimes call it floppy infant syndrome. A newborn might feel unusually limp, almost like a rag doll when you hold them. Because it's so physical, it's usually diagnosed really early, typically before a baby hits 6 months. Parents will notice these everyday moments where the infant struggles to lift their head, has poor neck control, or takes much longer to roll over and sit up compared to typical milestones.
The really crucial thing to understand here is that hypotonia itself is rarely a standalone disease. It's almost always a symptom of a deeper communication error between the brain, the spinal cord, the nerves, and the muscles. And the origins can be super diverse. It can stem from a lack of oxygen at birth, premature delivery, or issues during fetal development. Very frequently, it's linked to underlying genetic conditions like Down syndrome, Prader-Willi syndrome, or Tay-Sachs disease.
And I really want to emphasize this distinction because it's so important. A baby might actually have the raw muscle fiber strength, the actual physical capacity for power is there. But without that continuous, automatic baseline tension, their little bodies have to work exponentially harder just to fight gravity. Imagine trying to stand up while wearing a ridiculously heavy suit of armor. That is exactly what it feels like to struggle to sit upright or bend your elbows when you lack basic muscle tone.
All right, let's switch gears and look at the software side of things. Dyspraxia, the coordination glitch. Now, people actually mix this up a lot with apraxia, but medical science draws a very clear line between the two. Apraxia is a severe disconnect, a total loss of the ability to perform a movement even when the person really wants to do it. Dyspraxia, officially known as Developmental Coordination Disorder, or DCD, is different. The brain perfectly understands the command and desperately wants to execute it, but the planning and coordination just get lost in translation. The signals arrive, but they arrive out of sync, causing this frustrating partial loss of accuracy.
And here's a number that might actually blow your mind. An estimated 6% of all school-aged children are navigating this exact software glitch every single day. To put that into a real-world perspective, in an average classroom of 30 students, it is highly likely that 1 or 2 of those kids are burning incredible amounts of energy just to manage their daily physical movements.
And when we look at the data, it reveals something profoundly interesting about human neurology. There is a massive 50% overlap between children with DCD and those with ADHD. We also see really high co-occurrences with autism spectrum disorder and language difficulties. It just shows us how deeply interconnected our neurological software really is. When the brain's wiring develops even slightly differently in one area, it frequently cascades into this beautiful, complex web of overlapping neurodivergent traits. So because of these scrambled signals, a kid with DCD might just seem unusually clumsy to an outside observer. They might swing their arms restlessly to find balance, struggle with fine motor tasks like using scissors, or actively avoid things like sports or riding a bike. Imagine the incredible frustration of having a perfectly clear intention in your mind, but your body just stubbornly refuses to execute the sequence. That is the daily, hidden reality of dyspraxia.
Which brings us to spotting these signs early on.
Now, recognizing these glitches early is obviously the first step in helping out, but, kids develop at wildly different rates, making diagnosing DCD a very careful waiting game. While parents might notice subtle delays in early infancy, maybe late crawling or fumbling with toy cups, a definitive medical diagnosis usually doesn't happen until a child is at least 5 years old. That's when the gap between expected motor skills and the child's actual coordination becomes scientifically measurable.
Fascinatingly enough, the origins of both of these conditions share some really striking overlaps. Being born prematurely, specifically before the 37th week, or weighing under 4 pounds are significant shared risk factors. It's a powerful reminder that the final trimester is just this incredibly delicate time for the brain and nervous system to finish laying down billions of complex circuits.
And this leads us to the most hopeful and fascinating part of our explainer, rewiring for the future.
We absolutely have to shatter a major social stigma right now. Neither of these conditions is linked to a lack of intelligence or a lack of effort. When a child actively avoids a physical task, writes messily, or struggles on the playground, it's not because they aren't smart, and it is definitely not because they aren't trying. In fact, they're usually trying 10 times harder than everyone else, burning vast amounts of mental energy just to perform tasks the rest of us do completely on autopilot.
So how exactly do we help? Well, therapists use these incredibly cool evidence-based techniques like task-oriented intervention. This is literally the process of hacking and reprogramming the brain's software. Instead of looking at an overwhelming task like writing a sentence, they break that complex movement down into tiny, bite-sized, practicable steps. They adapt the physical tools, like adding special rubber grips to pencils, and slowly, through repetition, the brain literally builds new, efficient neural pathways.
Of course, it takes a dedicated village to make this happen, right? You've got occupational therapy for mastering daily life skills, physical therapy to build up foundational gross motor strength, and sometimes speech therapy, because the muscles used for talking and swallowing can totally be affected by low tone or poor coordination. And in the classroom, individualized education programs, or IEPs, are absolute lifesavers, ensuring that teachers become vital advocates for these kids every single day.
Now, while things like developmental coordination disorder and hypotonia are chronic, lifelong realities, we can't forget that the human brain is just an awe-inspiring engine of adaptation. Neuroplasticity is a beautiful, beautiful thing. With early intervention and dedicated therapies, kids find incredible success. As they grow, their muscle tone can improve, and they develop their own unique, absolutely brilliant coping strategies to navigate the physical world.
Ultimately, looking at the science of movement through this lens teaches us something profoundly beautiful about humanity. It makes us realize that there is no single right way for a human body to exist or move through the world. The brain isn't broken. It's just finding a different, highly customized route to achieve its goals. It's simply learning a completely different way to play the symphony of life.
So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder. Armed with this new scientific understanding of the incredibly complex hardware and software of human movement, how can we all be better advocates? How can we cultivate patience, adjust our everyday expectations, and help build a world that truly celebrates and supports the beautifully diverse people around us?